What kinds of strategies do people use when trying to learn something new? Are people consistent in those strategies? And does it change in older age? These questions were the basis of a new paper that we recently published, and I'm here to tell you about it.
The two strategies that we focused on were the prototype and exemplar strategies. The prototype of a category is an idealized category member that has all the most typical features of the category. So if we're thinking of the category of birds, the prototype is like an abstract, perfect bird that you've never actually seen before. Using the prototype strategy to categorize something new in the environment, like a creature that you see outside your window, would mean deciding if that creature is similar enough to the bird prototype you have stored in your mind. The exemplar strategy is somewhat similar, but instead of a prototype, the category is just represented by individual category members that you have stored in your mind. So individual birds, without the need to create that abstract prototype. So when you're deciding whether that creature out your window is a bird, using the exemplar strategy would mean bringing these individual birds to mind. We focus on these two categorization strategies because they're associated with formal mathematical models that we can fit to people's data to get an idea of what strategy they're using. People don't usually have a very good ability to tell us what kind of strategy that they're using directly. It's often something that people don't think about. It's kind of automatic and outside of their awareness. So we can use those models to get a hint at something that people can't tell us directly. We also have previous studies showing some evidence that older people tend to rely on the prototype strategy more often than younger people do. In this newly published study, we aimed to test how stable people were in the kind of strategy they used. Did the same people tend to rely on the prototype strategy when learning different kinds of categories, or were people more flexible in the kind of strategy that they used? To answer this question, we had 77 young adults between the ages of 18 and 30 and 74 older adults over the age of 60 who participated in the research study. The study consisted of 2 in-person experimental sessions separated by about 48 hours. During each session, participants completed a categorization task with the same structure. And they would be learning to categorize these cartoon animals that had 10 different features. And the features were binary, so they could have one version or the other. So the categories were structured so that each category had a unique prototype. These prototypes would contain all the most typical features of their category, and critically, they did not share any features with each other. So the prototype of category A was the exact opposite of the prototype of category B. So you see some examples here. And then all the items in the study differed based on how many features they shared or differed from each category prototype. So here we have it in terms of prototype distance. Category membership was defined by the number of features an item shared with their category prototype. So an item belonged to category A if it was closer or shared more features with the category A prototype than the category B prototype. And then, of course, vice versa for category B membership. The structure of the category was identical in both sessions, but the specific stimuli differed. So sometimes it would be the little chicken dragon guys that you can see on top here, and sometimes it would be the more piggy giraffe guys that we show here on the bottom. In each categorization task session, participants went through a training phase to help them learn the new category. They would see an individual cartoon on the screen, and at least at first, they would just guess as to which category it belonged to. So here the categories are Wallaces and grommets. And yes, unfortunately, we did spell grommets wrong in the task. It's noted in the manuscript, but it kind of can't be helped now. But that's what it looked like on the screen. After participants made their guess, they were told whether they were right or wrong and what the correct category was. Participants went through 336 training trials, so they were well and thoroughly tired of Wallaces and grommets by the end. And then after the training phase, they would do a categorization test where they would see more of these cartoon animals and sort them into the 2 categories, this time without receiving any feedback. Importantly, they saw new cartoons that were not part of the training phase, so that they needed to generalize from what they learned directly to new examples. This categorization test data is also what we use to determine the participants' categorization strategy by fitting formal computational, prototype, and exemplar models. And of course, they went through this process twice. So they had so much fun the first time, they came back and did it again. The second session, as I said, happened about 48 hours later, and they would start the process completely from scratch, learning categories with the other set of cartoons and with new labels, like in this case, Batmans and Robins instead of Wallaces and Gromits. As I mentioned, we can then use participants' responses from the categorization test to determine whether someone is relying on prototypes or exemplars to make their categorization decision. As a reminder, the prototype model proposes that categorization decisions are made based on an item's similarity to that abstract perfect category prototype. To fit this model, we compare each item in the categorization test phase to each category prototype to determine how many features it shares with each of them. The more features an item shares with the category A prototype relative to the category B prototype, the more likely the item will be categorized as a member of category A, at least according to the predictions of the prototype model. This is slightly simplified, but the prototype model would assume that an item that shared 9 features with the category A prototype and 1 feature with the category B prototype would have about a 90% chance of being classified as a member of category A. We go through this process for every single item on that categorization test to get a prediction from the prototype model of how likely a person is to label something a member of category A versus category B. We can then look at the participants' actual responses to determine how well the prototype model predicted those actual responses. So that will generate for us a model fit. That model fit is a number that represents how well the prototype model was able to predict the participants' actual categorization responses. We do basically the same process for fitting the exemplar model, except the way in which we calculate similarity is different. Instead of calculating an item's similarity to the prototypes, we compare the item to each individual training item within each category, and then sum the similarity across all the members of the same category. So from there, we determine the relative similarity of category A to category B to get a percent likelihood or prediction of how likely someone should be to classify that item as a member of category A versus category B. So this part is exactly like what we do with the prototype model. So here it would be about a 73% chance of calling this guy a member of category A, again, if someone were relying on exemplars to make their decision. And again, just like with the prototype model, we can compare the predictions from the model to a person's actual responses to get the fit of the model. Here we have the plot showing the proportion of participants who are using each strategy in each session. So session 1 on the left and session 2 on the right. The prototype users are in yellow, the exemplar users are in blue, and those were the two that we were focused on. We also fit another strategy called a unidimensional rule strategy, and that is in pink. Young adults are in solid bars, and older adults are the bars with the stripes on them. You'll also see on the x-axis the term similar, which refers to a similar fit. So those are participants where the difference in the model fits was so small that we couldn't really say whether they were using one strategy or another. The chance label that you also see refers to participants who are not fit very well by any model, so we can't really say that they were using, again, any particular strategy, and they might even have just been responding completely randomly, right? And then what you can see here, again, focusing on the prototype and exemplar models, is from the height of the bars, the large proportion of young and older adults who are using the prototype strategy. This was the most common, best fitting model in both age groups. In contrast, there were much fewer participants who were best fit by the exemplar model. And again, that was across both age groups, but there was a numerically greater proportion of young adult exemplar users than older adults. That said, the differences between young and older adults were not statistically significant for either the prototype or exemplar model. That means we don't have good evidence that one group is relying on the prototype strategy more than the other. We also did not see differences between the two sessions. The proportion of participants using each strategy were stable across the two sessions. So that's some initial evidence that there may be stability in the kinds of strategies people use. However, just because the total number of people using each strategy was pretty similar across sessions doesn't necessarily directly tell us whether it's the same people across those two sessions. So you could have an equal number of people kind of swapping strategies across the sessions, and then when you averaged everything together, it would look like stability when there's really actually a lot of change happening. So we had to do what's known as an individual differences analysis to see how stable those individual people were with their strategies. To do so, we calculated a metric which we called the prototype advantage. That describes how much more heavily a participant relied on the prototype strategy compared to the exemplar strategy, how much better the prototype model fit compared to the exemplar model. The larger the number, the greater the reliance on the prototype strategy compared to the exemplar strategy. We calculated the prototype advantage metric for each participant in each session, so in session 1 and session 2. So we could look at the relationship for each person across the two sessions. In other words, we examined how stable each participants were in their reliance on the prototype versus exemplar strategy. And what we have here is the graph showing those results. And what we found is that generally the prototype advantages in session 1 and session 2 were positively related. So you can see that the lines are generally sloped upwards, showing that positive relationship. In other words, the people who showed the strongest reliance on prototype strategy in session 1 also tended to show the strongest reliance on the prototype strategy in session 2. Similarly, people who showed pretty similar fits for the prototype and exemplar models in session 1 also tended to show relatively similar fits in session 2. Interestingly, though, this relationship was only statistically significant for older adults and not for young adults. What that means is that older adults were more stable in their use of prototypes than young adults. We think this is because it may be harder for us to remember unique exemplars as we get older, making it harder to use the exemplar strategy. That may make older adults less flexible to adopt different kinds of strategies, but nonetheless, older adults seem able to use this prototype strategy to learn and generalize new categories. And now I want to leave you with the big picture takeaways. We showed that there was no age difference in prototype use, indicating a preserved ability across the lifespan to rely on abstract representations when making categorization judgments. Additionally, we showed some evidence of weaker exemplar representations in older adults compared to young adults, consistent with older adults' reduced ability to remember the specific details of those individual exemplars. We showed for the first time evidence of more stability in the relative reliance of prototype versus exemplar strategies in older age. Together, these findings suggest that emphasizing the abstract big picture concept may be an especially good way for older adults to learn new concepts. And with that, I'd like to thank the students who led this project, Maddie and Kana, and thank you for listening. Until next time.